Welcome to our project planning and reporting session for our continuing grantees. I know some of you may have also joined us on the last session for new grantees, so thank you for sticking with us for the continuing session. Just to kind of verify who all should be on, we should have with us today those who had continuing NOL-ED grants, those who had continuing STEP grants, our NYCP grantees. If you are a PD grantee, we did cancel that session, so you do not need to attend. So if you want to get back an hour and a half of your day, feel free to disconnect if you're a professional development grantee. We'll be covering information with you separately at another time. But stick with us if you are an NYCP, NOL-ED, or STEP grantee. And we'll go ahead and get everyone disclaimed. This presentation was produced under U.S. Department of Education contract number GS00F115CA with Synergy Enterprises, Inc. The views expressed herein do not necessarily represent the positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Education. No official endorsement by the U.S. Department of Education of any product, commodity, service, or enterprise mentioned herein is intended or should be inferred. All right. Now that you're all disclaimed, I think I've met most of you now. I'm Sarah Brightwell, the OIE Technical Assistance Team Lead, and I'll be walking you through the webinar today. As we go through, if you have any questions, please pop them over in the chat box and we'll address them as we go through, as well as we'll have a dedicated time at the end for any of your questions. So make sure and pop those in. If you're having any trouble locating the chat box, look at the bottom of your screen. For most of you, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little talk bubble that will pop open the chat box for you. All right. Today, we're going to be talking about the meaning and importance of intentional program design, as well as SMART goals and objectives. We'll talk through the steps to successfully creating SMART goals and objectives, review the GEPRA measures for each of your individual grant programs, and some reporting requirements for each of you as well. And then explore a new tool that we've developed for your use and benefit, a project planner. We'll talk about its different components and how it can be used in your program. So as we get started today, I want to kind of take us back to the origins of our project and how when we started our project, our goal was to get everyone on the same page to create a culture of support for our program. Most likely, most of us conducted some form of needs assessment, either during the proposal process or upon award, looking at community, school, and student data. And then we designed our program around that, linking to specific academic, cultural, language, maybe social, emotional goals that we wanted to really hit. We looked at best practices, maybe some evidence-based practices, and how we could get our students and their families engaged in our programs. Then you got to do the fun part, where you're actually implementing with your students and delivering the services that you've designed. And then today we're going to really look at how we can take all of those things we've planned and how we can use our planning to drive our outcomes and to report our outcomes. So we're going to look at all of those pieces. So as I talk about SMART goals and objectives, I'm curious how many of you are familiar with that term. Is that a term you've heard before? Have you maybe created some of your own SMART goals and objectives before? So we're going to do a little voting. The voting may have moved in your Zoom window from the last time you voted. So you're going to find your voting buttons in one of two spots. Either look at the bottom of your screen, find your participant button. It's two little outlines of people. And when you click on it, it will bring up a list of everybody in our webinar today. And you can look at that. And down at the very bottom of that list is where you will find your voting buttons. Or if you don't see them there, then in your version of Zoom, down at the bottom of the screen, you'll probably see a little reaction button. And with that reaction button, you'll be able to vote. So using one of those two methods, if you could vote yes or no, you can also use the thumbs up, thumbs down, whatever you can actually find. And are you familiar with the concept of a SMART goal or objective, or not so much. If you can't find any of the reaction buttons or the voting buttons, you're also welcome to pop them over in the chat too. All right, looks like we have quite a few who are at least somewhat familiar with SMART goals, objectives, and some as not. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today and how it can kind of benefit your reporting. So for those who might be familiar, you may get some different ideas on how that can be used in your program, or just a little refresher. So as we think about SMART reporting, it really helps provide the big picture of our program and create a common purpose for our entire team while focusing us in on exactly what we want to achieve with our students and their families. It can also help us with monitoring and completing tasks that we need to do for our program, and keeps those expectations really clearly defined for all the members of our team. Now, before we get down into our exact goals and objectives, I want to start at the top of that kind of flow of thinking for your project with your vision and mission statement. So some of you may have a vision and or mission statement for your organization or even for your program. So I'm curious, we'll try out our voting buttons again. Remember, either under your participant button or your reaction button. How many of you have either a vision or mission statement for your program? It can be either or. If you don't, it's totally okay. Just trying to get an idea. All right. Looks like we have quite a few. If any of you happen to have it readily available, maybe committed to memory, and would like to share your vision or mission statement in the chat box, I think it's always great to share those, particularly for those who are maybe looking at developing them for themselves. We've got a couple of examples on the screen as well. So when I think about a vision statement, I'm really thinking really broad. And often the way that I think about it is if I were to close my eyes and imagine exactly what I would want my program to accomplish if there was nothing in the way, no barriers, no hurdles, if I could just do my program, what would I want to happen in the long term? Because our vision is always looking really long term. Then when I get down to my mission, I'm getting a little bit more specific. I'm thinking about how my project or my program is going to achieve that vision. So typically your mission is something that can be accomplished within the time span of your actual program grant. So if your grant is maybe 3 years or 5 years, that mission might be able to some extent be accomplished by then. If it's an organizational mission, it'll be a little longer term, and all leading back to that vision. So you can see the examples here on our slide. You can also check out the examples over in our chat box. Thank you to Jennifer and Nathan and Julie for sharing some of their vision and mission statements. So you can see in our example, we have a balanced and productive future for all Native students. That's definitely a broad statement. I think we could all think about what we think would be included in that and what would be part of that, but it would be unique to each of our communities and our student groups. But it paints that picture of what we want long term. And then when we get down to our mission, how we're going to do that, well, we're going to support our Native American students in successful academic achievement. And we're also going to preserve and respect the whole person through culturally relevant activities. So it's not getting down into the specific services you're going to be offering to your students, but just gives a little clearer picture of what you're doing in order to achieve that bigger vision. If you are interested in creating a vision and or mission statement for your program, we do have a tool we can share with you to be able to help with that as you're developing that out. As well as you can always reach out to our coaching team, and we're happy to meet with you and your team and work through that as well. I would also really encourage you to check out these great vision and missions over in the chat box. It's been added to by Rosalie and Maria. So there's 5 really good examples over in the chat box as well. All right, then as we move to our next level, so we've got our vision and mission up at the top of our planning pyramid. Now we're moving down to our goals and objectives. Your goals and objectives are what you're actually going to be reporting on. So we're starting to get more specific here. So with your goals, those are going to be long-term. Often I've seen people who will use their mission statement as their goal or goals. That's completely fine, or you may have separate ones. It's just going to be up to you and your team what kind of fits best for you. But it's going to be those longer term goals. Again, think about what you can accomplish during your whole grant period. So for most of us on this particular webinar, 3 to 5 years is our grant period. So what could you accomplish during that time? And then when we dig in a little deeper and get down to our objectives, they're the specific activities or targets of our project. So what are those big pieces of your project? Maybe it's that you were going to develop a mentorship program. And so maybe that's a big component of your program. Maybe you are going to expand your services to a new grade level. Maybe you were going to offer a certain number of college visits annually. What are the big pieces that really make up your program? That's what we're going to write our objectives about. They're the how of our goals. So if our goal was to, I'm going to steal one from in here. If our goal is to instill cultural pride through academic success and achievement, what are the specific pieces of our program that we're implementing to do that? Those are going to be your objectives. And the outcomes are the results. So the outcomes are really how you're going to show that you're meeting those objectives. And it's what we're going to report on in our annual performance report. And we're going to talk a bit about your annual performance report today. So as part of that reporting and as part of your goals and objectives, it's really important that we think about your GEPRA measures, because those are the objectives that no matter what, you have to report on them. So for our NOL-ED grantees, you have 4 GEPRA measures, and those have to be reported on every single year, no matter what. And they have to be reported on exactly as they're written here. Then for our NYCP grantees, you have 2 GEPRA measures. Again, both of these GEPRA measures have to be reported on every single year, exactly as written here. And so that's one thing that's consistent. No matter what your project is focused on, no matter what you're doing, you'll always make sure to report on these GEPRA measures every year. And then for our continuing step grantees, you actually only have 1 GEPRA measure. So we definitely have to make sure you're reporting on that every year because there's only 1 of them. So you'll make sure that every year you're reporting on this TEA creation GEPRA measure exactly as it's written here. So with your project objectives, all of you are continuing grantees, so you've already reported at least once before. So you do have to continue reporting on your project objectives, but that doesn't mean just those. Always the GEPRA and the project objectives. You have to report on both. So let's kind of look at how all this fits together. So as we're looking at this, we talked about vision and mission as kind of that nice overarching piece that encompasses your entire program and often your entire organization. Then we get down to our goals. The goals should be specific to your grant project. What long-term do we expect to achieve through this grant program? Again, across your 3 to 5 years of programming, what do we want to see for our students and their families? And then your objectives are those pieces and parts of how we're going to do it. So those objectives include your GEPRA measures, as well as any of those project objectives that you have been reporting on thus far. So for instance, as we think about how that kind of all feeds together, you may have a couple of project objectives and a GEPRA measure that all relate to one particular goal. Or you might have a goal that maybe only one project objective really relates to. Any of that is completely fine and is dependent upon your individual program design. The important part is that we continue reporting for all of our GEPRA measures and all of our project objectives every single year. And one thing that can help us do a really high quality job of reporting is the use of this SMART idea. Now, I want to start out as we're thinking about this. All of you have already set your project objectives. Because you have already set your project objectives, they cannot be changed. So you have to continue reporting on them as you've reported on them previously. However, that's specific to the wording of your project objective. So however you've had it worded in your previous APRs, you have to continue with that wording. What we want to use this SMART for at this point for you is in that qualitative reporting, in the narrative piece. So we've done a lot over the last few months of reading, lots of reading of proposals, lots of reading of your previous APRs. And what we want to do is give you some tips and tools to help you do the best type of reporting possible so that OIE and anyone else who reads your APR information, other legislators and things will get the best view of your program. You'll be able to highlight all the wonderful work you're doing in your program, the outcomes that you're seeing, both so that it paints an appropriate picture of your program, as well as so that it meets the requirements of your reporting and allows your program officer to easily move on with your continuation award. Because some of the things that we've seen in reporting is that sometimes the quantitative information might be getting reported not as clearly as possible. And often with the qualitative information, not as much information is there as might be needed or wanted by the department in order to be able to make continuation awards and understand the progress of your project. So that's what we're going to kind of think about this in regards to. So as we look at the SMART acronym, you'll notice we have it here broken down: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. Now, you may have seen this in a couple of different ways. So like Tanya had shared over in the chat box that when they've looked at SMART, they use specific, measurable, aligned, results-oriented, and time-bound. Completely fine, covers the same information. Just different people sometimes will use slightly different words for each of the letters. For attainable, I've seen aligned, I've seen achievable, I've seen for the T, time-based, time-bound. So sometimes you'll see different words for each of the SMART pieces, but the context and the information that then causes are going to be the same. So you're still on the right track. So let's break down the SMART piece and just kind of look at what that can look like in your reporting and in the content that you're going to have. We talked about before, the reason that this is helpful is it's going to really drive home the outcomes of your project. It's going to put that accountability on the team to really understand, what were the expectations and where are we with that, and focus everyone in. So as we look at the specific part, the point here is to have nice, detailed, focused, achievable goals and objectives. So when we're writing a SMART objective, I usually kind of caution people to try to make it just one sentence, because it's really easy to write a SMART paragraph, or the even more common, really, really long SMART run-on. And so we want to hone that in, get it a little bit more succinct and specific. So like I said, with yours, you've already got your objective wording, but think about when you're doing that qualitative reporting, you're writing that narrative down below. Are you being really specific about who that objective is about? Who are you reporting on? Is it a certain subset of students? Is it students who've participated in your activities a certain amount of time? Really getting very clear about what you're reporting on and who you're reporting on. And you can see that in the examples here. So when we're actually creating that objective piece, we're talking about, these are students who participated for both years of the project thus far, because we might expect to see more results in that instance. Or if you have students, if you're offering tutoring services, if a student only comes 1 or 2 times, you're probably not going to see a lot of results from that service. However, if they're coming on a regular basis, maybe 75% of the days that you offer that particular activity, we would expect to see more results out of that. So thinking about really detailing that out when you're writing your narrative and explaining that quantitative information. Think about your measurability. You do have to quantify all of your data. That's the part at the top of your G5 reporting where you put in your reporting ratio. But then when you go to write your narrative, are you really explaining how you measured that? So sometimes it's going to be something super simple. So with our NOLID grantees, think about on that piece. Some of you might be developing curriculum or assessments. With that, it's a simple, did you do it? Did you not? But describe how you know that. So if you were doing this assessment, you would be describing in that qualitative information how you went about developing that assessment and what came out of it and what type of assessment it would be. In our second example, which is more of a performance related, which is what a lot of our objectives are, you'll notice that we've got 75% of our students. You can see it's measured by a proficiency pre and post project test. All of that should then be detailed in that narrative. You should be explaining, if it was a pre and post test, that we pre-tested 80 of our K4 students in September of 2020. And then we delivered the post test in May of 2021. Only 75 of the 80 students were still available. So we only have pre and post for 75 of the 80 participants this year. All of that measuring information is important to include in that qualitative narrative piece. And it gives us that picture, because those numbers really just give us really small binocular view. And we want to get a much wider view. We want to turn the binoculars around and get that full panorama view of your program. That's what that qualitative information will give you. Next, attainable. So with this piece, really thinking about what's going to push us, but be realistic. Now, how does that fit into your narrative? Because as we've talked about, your objectives are set. So you may already have an objective, whether you set it or maybe someone before you set it, that you're thinking it's not that attainable. It was not set realistically. I know you can feel stuck with that because you have to keep reporting on it and it can't be changed. But in that qualitative narrative is where you can kind of address some of that realistic nature. You can explain, okay, here's what the objective says that our goal is. Here's why that has not been attainable. Explain the challenges, the barriers, the hurdles, and then explain what intermediary goal you've put in place for your project. So let's look at our second example to kind of do this. Let's say that someone set this as your goal, that by October 2021, you would have at least 75% of your kids showing progress. Well, as you've looked at your student data, you realize that you started out with only 20% of your kids making any kind of progress. So that's really a large leap to go from 20% to 75%. So you've realized that that's not the most realistic attainable goal. So you can then come back in that qualitative narrative and explain, our students started out at this base level. Here are the things we've offered to try to help that and the amount of progress we've seen. While we don't think we'll be at 75% by October 2021, we hope to be at 50% by October 2021 based on these services that we've put in place and these supports, and then make our 75% by maybe October 2022. You know, really explaining out that full context really, really is helpful, because then it explains, yes, that goal might show is not met by just the pure data at the top, the pure number quantifiable data at the top, but all that other piece comes into play when you can explain why it is that way and when you hope to achieve. The next piece is relevant. This isn't really much of a concern for most of you because I've seen your project objectives. They're relevant to your project. If you're writing new objectives for something, or just when you're explaining your information, you just want to make sure that it's always connected back, that your goal, your vision and mission and your goals and your objectives are all aligned. The only piece in particular I want to remind you about in regards to relevancy in your narrative piece is that in G5, you are limited in your character count. Now, you can still do quite a bit of explaining in that section, but you're ultimately limited. You want to put the most relevant, most pertinent information in that area. If you have additional information that you feel like continues to provide that broader picture of your program and that context, you can always move that information to section C. Section C has a much larger limit. I don't think you'll exceed that limit by any means. So think about, with our more limited space for our explanation in section A, which is the part, right? You put in your quantity and then you put in your narrative. Put your most pertinent, more important information there. And then if there's extra information you want to share about that, sometimes particularly like maybe you want to share a graph or a chart, which is really hard to do in that area, put that in section C and just include a note in that saying, I have more information to share. Please see section C. And then they'll know exactly where to look to get that additional information. It's better to have too much information than not enough. The other piece on relevancy is, don't feel like you have to repeat the exact same information over and over. And we'll talk about this a little bit more when we actually do your APR webinar and how you can set this up in your G5. But if you have extremely similar information for more than one objective, think about what unique information you can share for each one. You don't want to just copy and paste the same explanation for multiple objectives, because then it doesn't feel relevant and specific to that one. And then your last piece here is to be time-based. So this is something that's really easy to leave out of our SMART goals and objectives, and that's a deadline, basically. The way that I like to do it, I actually do it often, just like you see here in sample 2. I'll just put my deadline, my time-based or time-bound piece on the front, and then use it as a clause, put a comma in the rest of my sentence. So by the 3rd year of my grant, comma, by October 2021, comma. And that makes sure for me that I've got that time piece already built in there. That's just something that's helpful to me. In looking at a lot of the project objectives in the APRs, I will say, just like I see really with everyone that I do myself, it's easy to leave that time part out. And a lot of the project objectives in your APRs didn't necessarily have a specific time piece in there. So again, that's where that narrative can come in. That's your opportunity to go back and add in a timeline, a deadline. So think about detailing out, okay, by the end of this school year, so maybe by May 2021, this is what we expect, versus by the end of the grant year in October 2021, this is what we expect. For some of you, the end of your grant. really kind of detailing out that timeline in your narrative can be particularly helpful, especially when your objective might not have had a deadline in it. So again, it's just giving that full, nice picture. All right. So that gives kind of just an overview of the SMART acronym, how you can use that when you're writing new goals and objectives, but more specifically, particularly for all of you, how you can use that information in your narrative writing, no matter what your objectives might be. Just a couple of other things that I like to point out, particularly if you are going to be writing any goals and objectives that you want to be SMART, is just that reminder, make it succinct, get it down to that one sentence. You can always provide more narrative later. Use lots of action words and be aware of your time frame. And I give you some examples of some common action words there. And I do see I have a question over in the chat box about where to find the final performance report webinar for those who may be on no cost extension right now. If you are looking for that link, it is over on our YouTube, as well as I can send that out to you specifically. So I'll pull your info from the chat box and send you that link as well. All right, so we're going to just do a little mini game, kind of checking our understanding of the SMART piece. So we're going to use the voting buttons. Again, if you can't find the voting buttons, if they just aren't showing up in the right spots for you, feel free to use the chat box. But I'm going to show you a SMART objective. You're just going to vote. Yes, is it SMART? No, is it not SMART? So here we go. Students who attend the XYZ program will improve their mathematical abilities. SMART? Not SMART. Currently, it is a blowout on not SMART. We have definitely more votes there. So let's see. Not SMART. So it's relevant. That definitely has relevancy to a lot of our programs, but it's not specific. It's not measurable. I don't know if it's achievable because there's not enough information there, and definitely not time bound. So we need a little bit more information in order to be SMART. So let's try again. How about this one? 73% of students who attend the XYZ program, at least 88% of available program hours, and scored below proficiency on the beginning of year math benchmark will increase their mathematical abilities as follows. Third graders will increase in math fact fluency. Fourth graders will increase in fraction, addition, and subtraction. Fifth graders will increase in solving multi-step word problems. And those increases will be measured at the individual student level using the end of year math benchmark scores. All right. SMART? Not SMART. What do we think? We seem a little more torn on this one. All right, let's see. Definitely got votes for both. Close, not quite. So there are two dilemmas, one in the SMART and one in the reporting. So as far as SMART, there's not a specific timeline. We can kind of infer a timeline because they're using some benchmarks, but we don't really know, do they expect to see these results at the end of just one program year? Is it that they hope to get to this level by the end of their project? Not exactly sure. So the time bound is a little bit ambiguous in this one. And then the dilemma on the reporting side is that this has a lot of different parts and pieces to it that would be really challenging to report on in just one objective. Ideally, with this, we would want to break it up into multiple objectives where we could truly specifically report out on each of those components, which would make it a little bit easier. Some of you may have that same dilemma where you start looking at your objectives and you realize that, okay, I'm looking at this and it has multiple parts and pieces that I'm trying to report on. If you're not exactly sure on how best to report on one of your existing project objectives, I encourage you reach out to us. Let's talk it through. We would rather spend a little time and talk through any of your objectives and reporting now and get really great, fabulous annual performance reports than not, and then get performance reports and maybe have to follow up and do some clarification and questions. So feel free to ask any of those questions and we can help you kind of talk through and figure out the best way to do that. All right. And then a question about, I was thinking timing with start of year and end of year. Does it have to have specific dates? It doesn't necessarily have to have specific dates. Like I said, this one you could kind of infer that it might be like a 1 year type goal. It can just be helpful to understand, whether it is, this is what they hope to see achieved each year of their program versus just the first year of their program, or maybe the third year, particularly because all of your grants are multi-year projects, that if your objectives are written in this way, it's just not always clear which year of the program you might have expected to see this particular thing happen. But yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to say like October 2021 in it. It could say grant year 3 or by the end of the 4th year of the project. Any of that totally works. All right, let's try another one. By the end of the program year, at least 70% of students who regularly attend at least 50% of the program hours, the XYZ program will demonstrate increased mathematical abilities as measured by the beginning and end of year math benchmark tests. Smart, not smart. What are we thinking? So far, everybody's voting smart. We're a little slower on the vote this time. I can see we're mulling. Let's see. This one is smart. So this is more specific, it's measurable, achievable, relevant, and does have that time piece. One question that's come up on this one, it came up on our earlier webinar, so I do want to address it, is they brought up, well, it doesn't say how much the increase will be. So I want to give you kind of 2 options with that, both of them totally fine. So the intent with this program's particular goal was that they were looking for any increase. If a student went from 50% mastery to 51% mastery, they saw that as an increase. They were looking for just any incremental improvement. So that's why they left it a little more general as far as just, was there an increase at all? For others of us in our program, we may have determined we want students to go up a grade level, or we want them to move up by at least 10%, or we want to see them move from not passing a particular, maybe their math class, to passing their math class. So that's really up to you and your project team to talk through and determine what exactly you would consider as a true increase or true progress. And that's where, again, if in your project objective, if it's vague like that, use that narrative to describe, hey, we consider progress to be moving up 10 percentage points, percentile points, or we consider improvement to be any increase in achievement, or we consider progress to be moving from not passing a particular class to passing. So whatever that may be, again, that's where that narrative would come in, where you can explain that for you and your project, what does progress or increase mean? All right. So that is the end of our particular quiz there. I did want to just briefly touch upon, because I know we had some folks who were working on some goals and objectives just in general for their program. Again, not that we can change it in your APR reporting, but they were using it for their program planning in general. So I did want to throw out there a template that I've used with my staff before, because we love a good template. And when we're learning something new, it can be super helpful. So it was just a breakdown of that SMART goal structure where I would have them plug in the time piece, who's going to be participating, what are they going to be doing, and how are we going to measure? And so the way that ends up looking is by the end of the program year, the who being students who regularly attend the program. So they come at least 50% of program hours, and we want 70%. What are they going to do? Increase their mathematical abilities. And we're going to measure it through the beginning and end of your math benchmark tests. Okay. So depending on if this is something that would be useful for you, you're welcome to use that with your team. You could even, if you wanted, while you can't change it in your actual Section A project objective piece, you could even look at your project objectives and smart them up to assist you in writing the narrative piece, even though in the actual quantitative part, you would have to leave the wording the same. That would be fine as well. So there's that basic structure, and I'll leave it that way in the slide deck. So if you want to borrow that, that's available. But what I want to introduce you to now is the new tool that I kind of talked about a little in our beginning of the webinar. We've created project planners for each of your grant programs. So these project planners are an optional tool. It's up to you and your team to determine if you want to use it or what parts and pieces you would like to use, but we do encourage all of you to use it. We've had grantees using these on some of our other grant programs through like the NOL projects and things in the past, and they found them super helpful. So we have taken it and modified it to be unique to each of your grant programs. So we have one style for NYCP, one style for NOL at ED, and one style for STEP. And I'm going to walk you through a couple of the pieces and parts that I think would be particularly helpful and beneficial for you and your team. So this first part is your goals and objectives tool. This gives you one centralized place to be able to pop in all of your program and project goals and objectives and just have that all together. And if you want to take the time to look at how smart any of them are, or kind of look at what pieces and parts you might need to add in your narrative to make them smart, this gives you a space to be able to work through that. Now you'll see it also has a milestones section. So when we're talking about those milestones, we're thinking of those as intermediate benchmarks. In particular, the intermediate benchmarks that are kind of fresh on everybody's mind is what is going to be accomplished by your APR reporting. And I'm going to share those dates with you momentarily because that's what you'll be reporting on this year. And then what will you accomplish by the end of this grant year? So by September 30th, 2021. And this just gives you a place to look at each of your objectives and think about what are those intermediary things that we're going to accomplish that will then cause our objectives to be accomplished. And how is that going to then highlight our substantial progress? So on our annual performance report, we are really being asked to show what substantial progress we're making on our grant objectives, both our project specific ones and our GEPRA ones. Showing substantial progress is what allows our program officers to make our continuation awards and continue our projects, whether that be into our next year of our award or in new grant projects. So really, really thinking about how we can highlight what's going on in our program that's substantial progress. Now I see a question about, we'll be doing year 4 APR report this year, the last year of your grant, and will you need to report on an accumulation of all 4 years? So this is a really good question. Those of you who are in your last year of your NYCP project or in the last year of your NOL at ED project, and I'm not saying year 3 or year 4 because for different projects, it's a different year. But if you're in your last year and your grant ends September 30th, 2021, on your year 4 APR, you're going to be reporting only on this year. And I'll tell you your reporting period here in just one second. When you do your final performance report, which is due 120 days after your grant ends, then you're going to report on every year of your grant. So let me give you an example. I'm going to use Betty's project as an example. She is an NYCP grantee. She had a 4-year project. She's in her 4th year. In May, she's going to turn in her APR for this year, and she's just going to report on what she's done this grant year. But her grant ends September 30th, 2021. She will then have her final performance report, her FPR, due 120 days after that. So we count out, and that puts us to the end of January. So at the end of January, she's going to turn in her final performance report, where she'll report on her data for years 1 through 4 of her grant. So on her APR, she's just going to report on this year, and on her FPR, she'll report on all 4. Now, the secondary question in the box is, what about those of you who are on no-cost extension? If you are on a no-cost extension, then you are headed into reporting for your final performance report. Now, depending upon when your no-cost extension ends, your due dates are all going to be different. And if you're not sure when your due date is, please email and I'll help you figure out your due date. But it's take your no-cost extension end date, and then you go out 120 days, and that's when your report is due. So like I said, it's going to vary depending upon your no-cost extension and when that ends. But if you're not sure when your no-cost extension ends, or if you're not sure when that report would be due for your no-cost extension, just let me know and I'll help you figure out that due date. Okay. So hopping back into the planner. So if we're thinking about those milestones, the things that'll be accomplished by the time we do our APR reporting, as well as those things that we'll have accomplished by the end of our grant year, we can pop those in, and then they will magically show up over on this next tab, our project planning tab, where it says M1. It would pop in that milestone automatically for you. And then you could break it down into tasks that you need members of your team to work on or do. Now, the project planner is going to be sent to you in Google Docs. You can download it and use it in Excel. I encourage you, though, try it out in Google Docs. What I like about using it in that format is that I can have my whole team work on it. And you can even set it up so if there are members of your team that you want them to be able to see what's in there and maybe leave you a comment, but you don't want them to change anything, you can set them up with that permission. Versus you can have other members of your team that can make edits and actually change your planning documents. So you can set up those levels of interaction as well. The other nice thing is if you have these tasks, if you've decided you're going to use this and you've put in your milestones and you've gotten some tasks in, if you put their name here and then tag them in it, it will send them an email. So it'll say, hey, Olani, you've been assigned this task. And then they'll know to go in and check and see what's been assigned to them. So you can use this, and you'll see when you look in, this goes out for the life of your grant. So you can use whatever parts of it are helpful. And it almost creates basically a really simple Gantt tool. If you were on our distance learning session yesterday, Olani talked about Gantt tools. This will create kind of a simple one for you. And it's just a nice way to be able to kind of track some of that progress. So that's one thing that's in there. When you think about those tasks, they're really outlining the steps to achieving those milestones. It creates that implementation timeline and gives a great way to do some oversight. So you know that you've assigned this to someone, when they said it was going to be done, and just kind of gives a little bit of accountability to every member of that team. So that's over in this task timeline piece. Now you'll notice, and I'll show you in your live planner, I did go ahead and include it for year 1 through whatever the last year of your grant is, just so that you had all of that available, but you can delete and or hide any of it that has already passed and you don't want in there. I just didn't want to assume what you did or didn't want, so rather provide you with too much than not enough. So as we think about that APR reporting, I did want to make sure that all of you are aware of those reporting windows that are coming up. So if you are a NOL-ED or NYCP grantee, you have the same reporting windows. So for both of those groups, your report, your annual performance report, those of you on no cost extension, remember you have separate due dates, close your ears. But for those who are doing your annual performance report, that is due May 3rd, 2021. May 3rd. You're going to be reporting your data for this year from October 1st of 2020 to March 31st, 2021. So that's what data you'll need that you'll then report on May 3rd. If you are a STEP grantee, yours is a little bit different. Your report is due May 28th, and you're going to be reporting for October 1st to May 28th. So you have a little bit later window there. Now, we are going to be offering APR webinars. There'll be one for each specific program. So there'll be a NAL one, an NYCP one, and a STEP one, where we'll go over the actual logistics of how to do that in G5, any changes in what is expected in the reporting. So those will be important webinars to attend as well. And that's where we'll get more into the nitty-gritty of the actual reporting. This webinar is focused more on the planning for reporting and planning for your project piece, but know that we will still do those APR webinars coming up. And at the end of today's webinar, I'll tell you the dates for those so that you have all that at the ready. And if you are on a no-cost extension for STEP, you're not going to be doing a report on May 28th. You're going to be doing yours 120 days after the end of that no-cost extension. All right. Now I'm going to leap over and just give you a little look into the project planners that are going to be shared with you. So let me switch over here now. Remember that the project planners are unique to each of your programs. So as we're looking here, just helpful to keep in mind. So I'm going to start with the NYCP planner, mainly because we have the largest group from NYCP, and then I'll show you what makes the NAL and STEP planners a little bit different. So as we're getting started, all of these are set up in a spreadsheet format. So you have your tabs along the bottom, as well as if you see this little stack here of lines, if you click that, that also gives you all the tabs in one little easy spot. But the thing I like is that we've got a first tab here called Menu. This has all the tools in your entire workbook here, and you can automatically go to any of them. So if you hover over any of those, you'll see I can click on it, and then it has to load, but it's going to automatically take you to that particular page. There we go. So you're not having to go down through the tabs. So I'm going to go back to Menu. And so you can see all the various parts and pieces here, but all the workbooks, no matter your program, do have the Menu first tab. They also all have a project overview. The nice thing about the project overview is it's all the really important information about your project. If you get everything into this one tab, you can print it out and give it to anybody as an overview of your program. So it can be really helpful if maybe you have a new partner, a new funder, a new staff member. It just gives you kind of a quick look at all the really important stuff about your program. Now, as you're looking at this, you'll see there's some coloring. If you look at this kind of baby green, spring green color, those are the parts that you're going to need to enter that information into the spreadsheet. Other things, such as this, that is going, or your goals and objectives, you'll notice those all have formulas. That means that as you do other parts of the workbook, they'll automatically show up here. So you're welcome to type over those formulas and just put it in yourself. It won't hurt anything. But if you don't want to have to be typing, just know that as you put it into the other tabs, it will automatically appear here. The only parts you need to actually type yourself are the spring green colors. The next tab is another one that every workbook has. This is that goals and objectives area where you can pop in all of your existing goals and objectives. Remember that since you have already begun your reporting, We want to put those in with the exact wording that you've been using in your previous reporting. If you're new to your project, and this is going to be your first APR, you'll want to look back at the old APRs. If you can't find the old APRs or you don't have access to the old APRs, please reach out and we will help you get access to that, because that's going to be super helpful and important to you as you do the reporting. So please let us know if you are new to your program and don't have access to old APRs. Then that task timeline that we talked about. So just to show you how that works, if I come over here and write a milestone, notice how when I go to my task timeline, it's automatically showing up there. So that's what I mean by some of the formatting pieces where we've tried as much as possible to cut down on how many times you might have to type something if it just is going to be used elsewhere. It should, for the most part, pre-fill those things in. Same thing that if I were to go in and write an objective, just like I mentioned before, oh, let me get it in the right spot here. Write an objective. Then we'll go back to our project overview. And it'll show up. And I'll kind of show you that as we go along. And we've also got some notes in there to help with that. The next tab is the data collection tab. All of the planners have this. The difference between them, depending upon your program, is that your GEPRA will be different. So in the NYCP one, you just have your 2 GEPRA here. And then all your objectives, you'll notice, are already showing up. So that fake write an objective is already showing up here. So as we're looking at this, this is really to help you as you're preparing for the reporting. So as you look at your GEPRA or you look at your project objectives, what are you going to use to measure? So do you need to be collecting benchmark data? Do you need to be collecting attendance data, whether it be for school day attendance or your program attendance? Do you need to be collecting information on how many students have applied for college? What are those things that you need to actually be using as your measurement tool? Who's going to be responsible for that? I always encourage, it's great if we don't see the same name the whole way down. Get your whole team involved in this so you're not the one-man reporting band. And then if there's a particular group being assessed, it's good to denote that, whether it's your whole program, everybody who's involved in your project, or it's a certain grade level, students who participate in a certain activity, whatever that might be. And then the time frame is really important. So looking at that, when will you need to collect the data to be able to then report the data? If you go through and complete all that, it really creates almost a calendar of things that you can plop into your own calendar to make sure that you've got all the data ready to be analyzed and reported. All 3 of the project planners have a primary grant activities tab where you can denote the primary activities that you're conducting with any of your students. The next tab is solely in the NYCP project planner, and that's an area to discuss how you're addressing college and career readiness, since that is one of the pieces that is a priority for your particular grant project. All the planners have a partnership section where you can denote your current partners, past partners, future partners. This is really helpful when you're doing your section C. In section C for your annual performance report, you are expected to denote the status of all of your partnerships. So talking about what's going on with each of your partners, as well as if you have any new partners or partnerships that have ended. So you can keep track of all that here. All of the planners have a tab for staffing. Remembering that again, in section C, you'll be reporting on any key personnel staffing changes. So some of the things that are built in for these things like that is like, if I mark that this person is key personnel, and then I mark that that has changed, it turns it red as a visual reminder that I'm going to have to report on that, because that's something that is required. If I put no color comes up because I don't have to report on that necessarily. If it's something particularly important to your project, you could still choose to report on it, but you're not required to report on it as you would be if it were key personnel. The next tab is your professional development tab. Many of you have objectives around professional development, or those were key components of your project. So this is a really easy way to be able to keep track of who's participating in what professional development, all in one nifty spot. All the planners also have a sustainability tool to be able to help with sustainability planning. It's got a lot of different sections to it, and we're actually going to be doing some webinars in the future around sustainability that will go more into this particular tool if it's of interest. Now the budget section. Now I'm going to go back to the menu just to show you, because we have this broken down into 3 chunks. You have the planning part of your project planner. That's what we just went through. The budgeting part is going to be similar yet different for all of the planners. And that's because all of your budget worksheets look a little bit different. And also your project periods are a little bit different. So you'll see here, you've got the budget areas for whatever remaining years of your grant there are. And then I do want to go over to drawdowns. That's one that is the same for each of the planners. This is super helpful for reporting in section B, because in section B, you're expected to discuss your rate of drawdown, any remaining funds, high balances, that type of thing. And this is where you can easily keep track of the drawdowns that are occurring for your project. Whether you're keeping track and finding that information because you have view-only access in G5, or whether you're having to get that through your fiscal office, it's extremely important that you know when drawdowns are happening and for how much, and what your available balance is, not just locally, because that's important too, but in G5, because for reporting, you're expected to be reporting around the information from G5. So this can be really helpful for keeping track of that and then being able to use that information when you go to report in section B. Now, as I move into the third part, again, popping back to that menu real quick, you can see the third section here is your, oh, there we go, it didn't want to scroll for me, is your reporting section. So your reporting section, you'll notice, have your GEPRA. This is what will make it different workbook to workbook, because you do have different GEPRA. These other pieces will remain the same, but these are all pieces that are intended to help you with your reporting. So let's pop over to the GEPRA. Notice your GEPRA is already pre-filled for you because you have no option there. You'll write your objectives in if it's one that is related to a particular GEPRA, or I'll show you for your other project objectives. You can pop in your reporting as far as your quantifiable information, that quantitative data, and then go ahead and pop in your qualitative information, that explanation of progress narrative. That box will expand as you type in it. I would really even encourage to take a little time. Yes, it will take a little bit of time right now, but it will be well worth it when it comes reporting time to put in your old data, particularly at least your old quantitative data, because then when you go to do your FPR, it'll all be right here. So here are some of the benefits of this reporting section. Since all of you have done reporting before, many of you have probably already experienced the joy that is G5 and the quirks and finickiness of G5 and the timeouts. So G5 has a tendency to time out. It will time out even though you are typing. It counts the time around when you hit save, not around your active typing. And so what a lot of grantees will report is I was in there and I was working and I was typing, and then it timed out and I lost all of this great narrative I had just written. And you did. So with this, you'll do all your great writing right here. And then you can just copy and paste it into G5, eliminating that timeout issue. And if for any reason you were to get timed out or lose internet connection or just get kicked out for any reason, you didn't lose anything because you have it all right here in your planner. And so you don't have to have that frustration of, well, my first draft was awesome, but now I don't think it, when I'm trying to rewrite it, it's not coming out as great. It's all right here. It also is nice because with this, you can do any grammar checks, spell checks, and things before popping it into the actual G5 system. And then the final thing that makes it helpful is that then when you go to do your FPR, because we touched upon, eventually all of you will do an FPR, and you're expected in that to report your information for all years of your project. Well, what often happens then is that you're having to go back into your old APRs and pull that information, which can be a bit tedious. This way you have it all in one spot. You don't have to go back to get anything. It's all right here, and you just copy and paste it straight from right here into G5. The other piece that's helpful, particularly with your narrative, is that when you have that past year of narrative, you can see what you said before and then build upon that information without, again, having to go back and search through your APRs to see what you said in your narrative last time. So it just keeps everything really nice and in one spot and makes it easy to copy and paste into G5 as you're doing that reporting. You'll notice things like there are little notes all throughout the workbook giving you little helpful hints. So like for explanation of progress, if you hover over it, it has a nice little note explaining what all should be included in your explanation of progress, just as a reminder. And we've kind of tapped those away all throughout your workbook so that there's always little reminders of what each page or each cell might be asking you for. So that's what goes in there. You have that for GEPRA 1 and GEPRA 2 for NYCP. For NUL, you have it for all 4 GEPRA and 4 STEP for the 1. But you also have a similar tab for your additional project objectives, where you can do that same information, pop in your project objectives, your quantitative data, and that explanation of progress qualitative data all in one spot. Okay. The next tab is the same in every workbook. It's some reporting reminders. I encourage you before you start working on your reporting just to review these bits of information. It's just little helpful hints. If anything else pops up, I'll try to send that out as updates to this, but it's just little helpful hints as you go into reporting season each year. And then you'll see we've got these other sections down here. So you've got your executive summary, same thing. This will expand as you write in it, because remember, your executive summary can be up to 2 pages, but it lets you pop it in there. You can do all your work on it and then either cut and paste it into the G5 document or into the uploadable G5 document. There's also sections to work on your section B budget narrative and your section C narrative, as well as it has your optional budget reporting form in there as well. So just puts all of that reporting information in one convenient spot so that, again, you can copy and paste and go back and also review your data anytime you'd like. So that's everything in general. The things that make the NUL planner just a scotch bit different. We go back to their menu. Basically the same you'll see in the reporting, again, specific to their GEPRA and specific to their budget. The pieces, though, that are different in the planning is that we do have a curriculum tool here. Since many NUL grantees are developing curriculum and assessments as part of their project, we have a spot where you can track that to then be able to report on, as well as any work you're doing on developing assessments. So we do have those 2 additional tools in the NUL planner. And for the STEP planner, you'll see it's pretty similar to the NUL one with the exclusion of the curriculum and assessment pieces. So I know that was kind of a rapid run through all the tools that are available in there. Some of the things that I do want to point out in regards to the planner is that you also, because it is a Google Doc that you will have, complete and full access to, you can change it as you see fit. So if you want to add another tab because you have another tool that you think would be helpful for your project, add another tab. If you want to include some data that you want people from your team to review in that same spot, throw it in there. This is your planner, so you can change and adapt it as you see fit. If you're already using this other tool and you just want to integrate it with this, go for it. If you have any trouble getting anything added in there, please reach out and we can help you with that. This is an optional tool, but we do encourage that you at least try it out. Like I said, you may find that you already have something maybe for task management, so you don't necessarily want to use the task timeline, but maybe you do want to use the reporting tools to help you prepare for your G5 reporting. So it's not that you have to, if you choose to use it, do every little piece of it. It is here as a tool for you. So we want you to use the parts of it that are most useful for you and your team and change and modify it as you like. If you have questions about how to use the planner, or you get stuck on a part of it, or you want feedback on part of it, or even if you just like advice on how to combine some tools that you already have, that's what we're here for. You can schedule what we call coaching sessions. Just email us at oie@seiservices.com. We can meet with just your project director, with your whole program team, and help walk you through any of this that would be helpful, specific to your own project, your own program, and your own team. So that's what we're here for, is to help and support you. So please reach out and let us know, how we can best do that. As far as the planner, I am going to be sending that out to you. You will be receiving your planners tomorrow morning. Okay. So I didn't want to send them out in advance of the webinar because I thought that'd be awfully confusing to get this long document and not know what in the world it was. So much better to tell you about it and then you get it. So you're going to be getting that planner tomorrow morning. If you were on the earlier webinar, that's different because that's a different planner. But for those on this webinar, you'll be getting yours tomorrow morning. All right. So I do want to get to some of your questions here in the chat box. Asking if it was in Excel or Sheets. So that is in Google Sheets. And we did that so that you could, again, share it with your whole team and make it a collaborative document in that Google environment. However, you can download it as an Excel document, as well as if you wanted it printable, you can even download it. If I'm trying to print it, I find PDFs a little easier. So you can export it however you like, but it'll be shared with you as a Google Sheets document. All right, let's see. And yes, I agree. For those who are like, where were you 4 years ago? How helpful this would have been at the beginning. I agree with you. I wish we'd been here then. But that's why we're, at least as quickly as possible, getting this to you now. And like I said, I'm happy to help you think about how you can kind of make this work for you midstream and then keep it going, hopefully, into your future projects and things. Let's see. And yeah, there's actually a reference in the chat box about, this would be helpful even in writing new projects. Absolutely. I agree with that. As far as a copy of this webinar, yes, we are recording this webinar. I will be getting that recording prepped this evening and I'll send it out with your workbooks tomorrow morning. So you'll get a copy of the slide deck, a link to the actual recording, and then the workbook as well. All right. When will G5 be open for the May 3rd reporting? Great question. So G5 is supposed to open, and I always like to say supposed to because it's G5. It's supposed to open March 1st. Now that is solely for the NYCP and the Knowledge D grantees. For the STEP grantees, your G5 will open May 15th because you have that later time. So yours will open on May 15th. For everyone else, it will open, fingers crossed, March 1st to be due on May 3rd. All right. I think that is all the questions from the chat box at this time. It looks like a couple are popping in some questions now, but I do, as I'm answering these last few questions, want to go ahead and post up our typical end of event poll. If you don't mind fast fingering in your answers, that would be great. And I'll get to these last couple of questions. Let's see. Would it be possible to get copies of all workbooks for planning future project, writing new grants? Yes, if you're interested in checking out any of the other project planners, if you'll just shoot me an email so I know you're interested, I can get you a copy. I just know not everybody would be interested in that, so I don't want to bombard everybody with a bunch of planners, but absolutely, I'll share my email address here momentarily, and I'm happy to share that. For the floating FPR based on staggered NCEs, when do your G5s open? Great question. It should open 30 days prior to your NCE being due. So let's say that your NCE was going to be due the end of March. It should open March 1st. If you go in and try to start working on your final performance report and it's not showing as open, but it is 30 days prior to it being due, let me know and I can figure out what it is and help you try to get that opened back up. But typically you should be able to get in there at that point. All right, let's see. Oh, yes. Can I go back to the coaching slide? Absolutely. And this is actually the same email address that if you're interested in one of the workbooks that is not for your actual grant, you can email me here at oie@seiservices.com, and I'm happy to share that. All right. And I'll pop up the email address again just in one moment, but I do want to just highlight a couple of other events that we have coming up in the near future. So one is our project director meeting coming up in April. All of you should have received a save the date, but that's going to be April 20th to 22nd. That's a Tuesday to Thursday. We'll be meeting each afternoon from 1 to 6:15 Eastern. So for some of you in the morning, but in the afternoons Eastern. Don't worry, there will be some stretch breaks in there, but we have some great sessions planned, some great speakers coming, and really looking forward to that event. And then in the webinar world, so I wanted to make sure that all of you know when your APR webinars are coming out. I'm going to get the invites to those out this afternoon. So if you are a Knowledge D grantee, your APR webinar will be March 8th at 1 Eastern. If you are an NYCP grantee, your APR webinar will be March 9th at 2 Eastern. And if you're a STEP grantee, your APR webinar will be April 28th at 2 Eastern. And I often have a question about if you're in your last year of your grant, when will you learn how to do the FPR? We will do a webinar specifically on FPRs for those who are in the last year of your grant, but not until probably late August, early September, because that's when you'll actually start getting all that information together. So yes, we will have a webinar on that, but not for a few more months. Next up, the other events that I want to remind you about are the distance learning series. So we are continuing that over the next few months. In March, we will be doing audio and video recording on March 9th and virtual assessment on March 23rd. When I send out your links and things, I'll send you a new link to be able to register for the March through May sessions of the distance learning. Remember, that's open to anyone in your team, so we welcome anyone and everyone to join us for those. Tomorrow, we do have our February office hours session. Those are our informal sessions. They're come and go. You can hop in anytime within that hour to ask any questions that you might have. So feel free to join us for that tomorrow from 1 to 2 Eastern. And then one little reminder just for our NOL-ED grantees. If you are a NOL-ED grantee, we do have our talking circle tomorrow. So please make sure to join that, just specifically for our NOL folks. And then I'll pop this back up just so you can grab those email addresses again if you need contact info for any of your program officers, as well as if you were looking for the one for the TA team, it's located right here. And let's see. As far as the link for the director's meeting, the registration has not opened for the project director meeting just yet. That should be coming out in the next couple of weeks. And then you'll be able to share that with those from your team that you'll be inviting. Just a quick reminder on that while we're talking about that, you will, for each of your grants, be able to invite 3 people, including yourself. So if you're the project director, you can invite 2 other people. Each grant gets a team of 3 to be able to attend to that project director meeting. If you have multiple grants, remember that each unique grant gets a team of 3. So don't feel like if you have 3 grants, that means you can have 9 people. So think of it in that way. As far as who to invite, I encourage you to think about, of course, your project director, because that's who the meeting is for and is a required attendee. But think about anybody else who's involved with your program really in a leadership role. I think that would be a great person to invite. If you have an evaluator who works on your program, that would be a great person, or someone who helps you a lot with the reporting end of things. We'll also have some sessions on budgetary pieces. So always a good add there. So just some thoughts on who you might want to include in your team of 3. All right. And then as you think about the contact info, remember, as you are reaching out to your program officers as well as to the TA team, it would be super helpful if you could make sure and include both your grantee name and your PR number. That is how we look up your project, because even if you include just your grantee name, many of you have multiple grants or they're grantees with similar names. So we need that PR number to make sure we're looking at the right information to get you the right answer to your questions. So make sure that you're including both your grantee name and your PR number when you reach out. The dates, someone asked for the dates for the project director meeting. I'll pop that slide back up. It's April 20th to 22nd, which is a Tuesday to Thursday. And then finally, I'm going to pop over in the chat box, or actually have our great team pop over in the chat box, our wrap up feedback survey. If you've never tried doing the feedback survey before, today's the day. It takes 2 to 3 minutes. It is super simple and easy, but it is extremely helpful to the TA team as we get feedback on today's event and information for future events. So if you don't mind clicking on that Survey Monkey link and giving us that 2 to 3 minutes of feedback, that is always extremely helpful. And then I see a question about, can you attend the project director meeting if your NCE will end prior to it? I would say currently the answer would be no. I will check and see if we think we're going to have enough spots, because we're limited on the platform to how many seats we have. So Tammy, I'll check and get back to you on that. But I would say for right now, yes, unless you're an active grantee on April 20th, probably not, but I will double check for you. All right. Well, I think we have covered all of the questions in the chat box. So thank you for joining us today. I look forward to talking with you as you're all getting ready for your performance reporting. Like I said, I'll be sending out the invites to your APR webinars this afternoon, and then I'll send out your planners, the slide recording and slide deck all tomorrow. But please reach out if you have any questions, and we'll see you on an event soon. Bye, everyone.